Hello, and welcome to West Virginia Press Insight, a production of the West Virginia newspaper industry. I'm Tom Hunter.
And I'm Betsy DeBoard. Like you, we're interested in issues impacting West Virginia.
West Virginia Press Insight focuses on policy and impact, not politics or personalities.
Today, we're looking at the following issues: teacher pay raises and a possible strike, sports betting in West Virginia, allowing guns on college campuses, work requirement for SNAP benefits, the future of the Department of Education and the Arts, statewide jail consolidation, WVU's Festival of Ideas opioid panel discussion on February 20th in Charleston, legislation to support caregivers in West Virginia, and tourism in the Northern Panhandle.
And on In Depth with Don Smith, legislation addressing manufacturing and economic development. As state leaders continue work to find a pay raise and benefit plan that teachers and state employees find acceptable, protests and rallies continue across the Mountain State. The Herald-Dispatch of Huntington reported the classes were canceled in Brooke, Cabell, Wayne, Mason, and Lincoln counties February 16th as school employees held a one-day work stoppage to protest changes to health insurance provisions for state workers and salary increases they consider inadequate. The West Virginia Education Association and the American Federation of Teachers West Virginia chapter scheduled an education rally at the Capitol on February 17th. Despite criticism that a 2% pay raise package is inadequate, the West Virginia House of Delegates passed its pay increase proposal for teachers, school service personnel, and other state employees on a 98-1 vote. That came after several amendments to increase the amount of raises failed. Senate Bill 267 now heads back to the Senate, which on February 2nd advanced its version of the bill with only 1% pay raises effective July 1. Now, the House action may not stop teachers in West Virginia from striking. Teachers across the state have voted to authorize action. Their move came in expectation of a pay raise of 2% for next year, followed by 1% pay raises in each of the next 3 years. Dale Lee, president of the West Virginia Education Association, and Christine Campbell, president of the American Federation of Teachers West Virginia chapter, declined to say exactly what action teachers may take. But Matt Combs reports in the Beckley Register Herald that the vote, taken following a joint statewide meeting in Flatwoods, could clear the way for the first teacher strike in West Virginia in nearly 3 decades. Ryan Quinn of the Charleston Gazette-Mail adds that the majority supported action in every county, with just 3 counties falling below 70% approval. The proposal now goes to the Senate. Governor Jim Justice and Senate leadership have said they still support a 1% pay hike in each of the next 5 years. That amounts to a little bit more than a $400 raise on average yearly.
And you know, Tom, the state insurance system, PEIA, has been at the forefront of these discussions as well. Teachers say the once generous insurance plan has been watered down over the years with higher premiums and copays. Governor Justice has agreed to put an extra $23 million in the plan this year to fill some holes, but state workers have asked for a long-term fix.
And Betsy, while most attention is understandably focused on pay raises and changes to PEIA, teachers union leaders say they still have some concerns as well in other areas. One centers on a potential change to the way dues are collected through teachers' paychecks, and the other makes changes to the seniority process.
Yes, and other state employees would get a 1% pay raise under the plan currently in place. That's with the exception of correctional officers, who stand to get a $2,000 raise in each of the next 3 years.
And with so much focus on teachers and other state employee pay, action on many other issues at the legislature has been delayed. It'll be interesting to see not only how this issue plays out over the final weeks of the session, but what effect it may have on other legislation.
The West Virginia legislature is moving forward on a proposal to legalize sports betting if the United States Supreme Court rules in favor of allowing states to offer it. Jocelyn King reports in the Wheeling News Register that the measure could create jobs at the state's 4 racetracks and the casino at the Greenbrier Resort.
Delegate Sean Fluharty, who represents Ohio County, proposed the bill. He says the Lottery Commission would oversee sports betting as it does other gambling, and the casinos already have the infrastructure in place to handle it. Senate Majority Leader Ryan Ferns adds the legislation would allow for apps for betting if people already have player memberships established at the track.
The betting would be taxed at a rate of 10% of general gross revenue. One study says that would be an additional $13.4 million in revenue the first year, potentially growing to nearly $29 million by the 5th year. Phil Kavler reports in the Charleston Gazette-Mail that one potential issue with the bill is opposition from the National Basketball Association and Major League Baseball, at least as the law is currently drafted. Those major sports leagues say the bill doesn't have proper safeguards, doesn't protect consumers, and wouldn't prohibit players from betting on their own sports. Those groups have offered to help improve the legislation, and they also recommend a 1% integrity tax to help them investigate problems and monitor games.
Those are good points, Betsy, but the West Virginia Lottery Commission opposes that additional 1% tax.
However, officials there say it should actually be easier to monitor gambling in a regulated market.
The Senate Judiciary Committee and Finance Committee approved the proposal after 2 days of discussion. That version does not include the 1% cut for the sports leagues, although the concept must still go through the House of Delegates.
The Gazette-Mail's Phil Kavler reports that the Lottery Commission wants to capture 2/3 of the illegal sports betting market in the state. They say a conservative estimate for that is $250 million in West Virginia alone.
It's important to remember, though, that all this discussion hinges on the U.S. Supreme Court's ruling. New Jersey is challenging a federal ban on sports gambling in states that don't currently have it. A decision could come as early as this spring, and then we'll see whether West Virginia is in the game.
I'm Corey Zinn, Executive Director of Create West Virginia, filling in for Tom Hunter. It seems like every year there's a proposal related to guns before West Virginia lawmakers. This year they're considering a bill that would allow firearms to be carried on college campuses. The measure would prohibit colleges or their regulating bodies from creating or enforcing rules that prohibit guns on campus. The state's two largest schools, West Virginia University and Marshall University, both oppose the idea. Kira Bisgarner reports in Marshall's student newspaper, The Parthenon, that President Jerome Gilbert and student body president Matt Jarvis both told delegates they oppose the proposal. Gilbert says guns on campus will decrease the level of safety and put more people at risk due to accidental or purposeful injury due to firearm use. Jarvis says if the law passes, the resulting fear and anxiety would be detrimental to the overall well-being of Marshall students. The Daily Athenaeum, WVU's student newspaper, wrote an editorial opposing the concept. They noted comments made by Rob Alsop, WVU's Vice President of Strategic Initiatives. Alsop testified at a legislative hearing and says putting additional weapons on campus doesn't make it safer. Instead, he says it makes it easier to escalate a situation. The DA editorial also notes that drugs and alcohol have a presence in the area, and adding guns to that mix is not a good idea.
And you know, Corey, the proposal, which passed the House Education Committee, comes from Delegate Jim Butler of Mason County. He says the change would let potential campus shooters know students might be armed. That, Butler says, could deter someone from trying to attack on a campus. There would be some exemptions for places that weapons would be allowed.
Colleges could regulate guns in stadiums and arenas that have a capacity for 5,000 or more spectators. That would include the basketball and football venues at both Marshall and WVU.
It would not, however, keep people from carrying guns at tailgate parties on campus, WVU's Chief of Police notes.
More discussion will take place on this in the House of Delegates. If the House approves, then it would be up to the state Senate whether to follow suit.
Members of the House of Delegates are considering a bill that would impose work requirements on people receiving benefits through the Supplemental Nutrition Assistance Program, that's often referred to as SNAP or food stamps. Jake Zuckerman reports in the Charleston Gazette-Mail that the vast majority of speakers at a public hearing opposed the change. It passed at the committee level shortly after the hearing, however. Zuckerman reports that the bill in its current form would impose work requirements on many people. That includes able-bodied adults between 18 and 50 who are not disabled, pregnant, or responsible for the care of a child. People would be required to work, volunteer, or participate in an educational program for 20 hours a week to receive SNAP benefits. The State Department of Health and Human Resources currently follows those rules, but can issue waivers where the unemployment rate is above 10%. Those waivers would be phased out. The DHHR has been running a pilot program of the legislation in 9 counties: Berkeley, Cabell, Harrison, Jefferson, Kanawha, Marion, Monongalia, Morgan, and Putnam. In those counties, while the number of SNAP recipients has decreased by about 5,400, employment data did not increase as some proponents had expected.
And Betsy, of the 23 people who spoke at a public hearing, just 2 spoke in favor of the bill. Juliette Terry, representing the Opportunity Solutions Project and the West Virginia Business and Industry Council, and John Canfield, representing the West Virginia Chamber of Commerce. They say the legislation has benefits.
Yes, and Terry says it encourages self-sufficiency and independence so people can work their way back after unfortunate circumstances. It also helps fight waste, fraud, abuse, and preserves resources for people who truly need help.
Now, opponents of the bill cited a study that shows 1 in 5 West Virginians depend upon SNAP benefits, with the rate rising to 1 in 3 among children. They say it's tough enough being poor in West Virginia and struggling to get food, and putting more obstacles in the way won't help anyone.
And you know, Tom, a similar bill passed the Senate last year, but not the House of Delegates.
West Virginia Department of Education and the Arts Secretary Gail Manchin could soon be unemployed if the West Virginia Senate follows the House of Delegates' lead. The House passed legislation to dissolve the Department of Education and the Arts and eliminate the Secretary's position by a vote of 60 to 36. The agencies within the Department of Education and the Arts will be moved to other state agencies. Only Gail Manchin's position and the name of her department will be eliminated. Manchin, of course, is the wife of U.S. Democratic Senator Joe Manchin. Every Republican within the House of Delegates except one voted to get rid of the Department of Education and the Arts. Every Democrat within the House of Delegates voted to keep the department. All the agencies within the Department of Education and the Arts will remain intact, including the Educational Broadcasting Authority and State Library Commission. Now, they will be considered as separate independent agencies within the executive branch under this proposed legislation.
Yes, and the Division of Culture and History, as well as the Division of Rehabilitation Services, will be moved to the Department of Commerce.
Betsy, the Department of Education and the Arts is a separate entity from the West Virginia Department of Education, which focuses primarily on pre-K through 12th grade public education.
And you know, Tom, this is the second year House Bill 4006 has been introduced and passed. The Senate did not take up the bill last year, however.
It's interesting that the Educational Broadcasting Authority and State Library Commission will be considered as separate independent agencies within the executive branch within this bill, because that in essence gives an elected official, along with the governor's staff and volunteers, control of a potential media outlet. Now, there are some concerns about the development of state TV and possible plans to control the message and limit mainstream media and public access to government information.
County leaders say the statewide jail consolidation bills in the legislature sound great, but they're afraid they will cost the counties more, not less. At a 3-day conference of counties in Charleston, Harrison County Commission President Ron Watson told West Virginia News reporter John Dahlia that his main concern is paying the per diem cost of inmates who are arrested by city and state police. Watson says last month's bill was $190,000. Only about 20% of those arrests were by the county, but it still had to pay per diem costs for all inmates. Both houses changed the caps on the per diem rate after hearing concerns from county leaders. The House bill currently sets the rate at $48.25. The Senate's current version of the consolidation bill caps the per diem rate at $55.
And Betsy, if passed, these bills will merge the divisions of Juvenile Services, Corrections, and the Regional Jail Authority into one governmental unit. Both bills are in committee in the House and the Senate.
Another proposal in the House would raise salaries of correctional officers $2,000 a year over the next 3 years.
Now, West Virginia Secretary of Military Affairs and Public Safety Jeff Sandy says it will help attract and retain good employees. Sandy told the State Journal's reporter Linda Harris the cost could be offset with a $20 increase in the fee charged to House federal prisoners in state facilities, as well as reduced overtime of the bare-bones staff now working. To recognize their work to support family caregivers in West Virginia, AARP has named West Virginia Senate Health Chairman Senator Tom Takubo of Kanawha County, Senator Ron Stallings of Boone County as national recipients of AARP's Capital Caregivers Award. The 2017 class of Capital Caregivers honorees is a bipartisan group of 91 state legislators and state officials from more than 30 states across the country who have advanced policies to help family caregivers who are making it possible for older Americans to live independently at home where they want to be. West Virginia Senate President Mitch Carmichael, a past recipient of the national award, joined AARP West Virginia state leaders and volunteers to formally recognize the pair during a February 15 event at the state capitol in Charleston. Takubo, again a Kanawha County Republican, and Stallings, a Democrat representing Boone County, were recognized by the national organization for their leadership in the 2017 passage of legislation that allows registered nurses to practice across state lines. The Enhanced Nurse Licensure Compact makes West Virginia one of 29 compact member states and helping to improve access to primary care in the Mountain State.
And you know, Tom, caregiving is such a critical issue in our state, with nearly 300,000 West Virginians providing unpaid care for their older loved ones as family caregivers. They help with bathing and dressing, meal preparation, medication management, managing finances, transportation, grocery shopping, and more.
Yeah, and Betsy, the financial impact of this unpaid care in the Mountain State is nearly valued at about $2.8 billion annually, helping to keep older West Virginians at home where they want to be as they age.
AARP reports that in the past 2 years, state legislators and governors across the nation have joined to enact more than 150 new state laws to support approximately 40 million family caregivers.
Legislation to study the issue of palliative care in West Virginia is moving at the state capitol as the House has unanimously passed that legislation, which is now under consideration in the Senate. The goal of that legislation is to provide additional support to family caregivers in the Mountain State and their loved ones by improving the quality and delivery of patient-centered and family-focused care.
West Virginia has more opioid deaths than any other state in the country. The drug epidemic is not only killing our future generations, it's taking away 12% of our GDP every year to the tune of nearly $9 billion. That's nearly $5,000 per resident. West Virginia University is hosting a panel discussion in Charleston later this month to find ways to combat and solve our problem. Understanding the opioid epidemic starts at 7:30 on February 20th in the Charleston Civic Center. It's part of WVU's Festival of Ideas. The panel is co-sponsored by the Charleston Gazette-Mail. 6 opioid crisis experts from WVU and the Gazette-Mail, including Pulitzer Prize-winning journalist Eric Ayre, who won journalism's highest prize writing about the drug epidemic, will sit on the panel. The Vice President and Dean for WVU's Health Science Center, Dr. Clay Marsh, will moderate the event. West Virginia's Public Health Commissioner, Raul Gupta, says we have never seen a public health disaster that is impacting the economy like the opioid crisis. A WVU study estimates drug use cost the state $1 billion every year because of lost productivity. There are no statistics on the value of lives lost. Department of Health and Human Services Chief Bill Crouch told the Charleston Gazette-Mail it's a health problem of unbelievable proportions. Crouch says 83% of all children in foster care are in foster care because of a drug addiction. The panel discussion about the opioid epidemic is free and open to the public. Next on In Depth with Dawn Smith, we welcome Rebecca McPhail, Executive Director of the West Virginia Manufacturers Association, and Bill Bissett, President of the Huntington Regional Chamber of Commerce. They will discuss legislation addressing manufacturing and economic development.
Welcome to In Depth. I'm Dawn Smith, and today we welcome Rebecca McPhail, President of the West Virginia Manufacturers Association, and Bill Bissett, President of the Huntington Regional Chamber. We're looking at legislation addressing manufacturing and economic development. Welcome.
Thank you.
This has been a session that has had to focus on education, teachers, PEIA, but there are some very important pieces of legislation addressing economic development in West Virginia, addressing manufacturing, things that your groups have been working for years to move, and they seem like they have a chance. We're past the midway point. I wanted to talk a little bit today about what's happening, what's out there, your number one priority, and what West Virginians need to know and might not know about some of these pieces of legislation. And I think from talking earlier, the number one thing I want to talk about is HCR 106, which probably to the people of West Virginia is the governor's Just Cut Taxes and Win amendment bill. I'll let both of you come in, but where are we with that bill? How's that bill doing right now? What are we seeing? Rebecca?
Well, Dawn, thank you again for having me here today. That has become, HCR 106, our primary issue this legislative session from the Manufacturers Association perspective. Right now, the bill hasn't moved through committee, but has been introduced as HCR 106 in the House and SCR 9 in the Senate. There is a possibility that that bill could run as early as next week, but obviously there are a lot of issues of importance at the session this year, and so it's been a little bit of a slow start.
With every session, you expect the unexpected. And obviously right now we're embroiled in a discussion of teacher pay raises and other issues along with PEIA. And we still, I think, have to focus on what's important to grow the private economy in our state. In an area like Huntington, we're seeing some economic development, we're seeing some optimism, but we want that to continue. And when you talk to business owners or economic developers, there's a real concern about inventory taxes, about things that are causing us to be held behind while other states are seeing growth. We're seeing growth in Huntington, but want to see more, and hopefully we can get success out of our legislature to have those successes happen.
As I've studied the tax situation and I've followed the West Virginia Forward program, it talked about West Virginia's overall tax package, and it said it was pretty good, probably in the top 20, but the inventory tax was an outlier. And in our conversations getting ready for this, you pointed out that none of the contiguous states around West Virginia are at anywhere near the level we are. Some don't have it, and I think Kentucky is maybe 10% of what we have. Bill, you're in Huntington, and Rebecca, you have members all over the state. How is that impacting West Virginia day to day outside of the session? What are you seeing with your members and your operations throughout the year? How does this impact operations?
I think it hurts an area like Huntington in two ways. I mean, we have Kentucky and Ohio in walking distance. So if I'm an existing business and I'm building a warehouse, why don't I build it across the border? Why don't I invest over there where I don't have to pay those kind of taxes? But at the same time, if I'm a new business looking at where I can be and I need maybe the transportation infrastructure we have in Huntington, why select West Virginia when I can go somewhere else nearby, still get the benefit of that rail or river system, but be elsewhere and not have to have this kind of onerous tax?
For manufacturers that have been doing business in West Virginia for decades, this is a definite impediment. You know, we're at a place where it's time to make decisions about capital investments. Do we add new equipment? Do we add new machinery? Or can we go someplace else and do that? Just before I came here today, I got a Google alert about a company manufacturer in Raleigh County that's opted to leave West Virginia and move to Virginia, where this is a completely different treatment from a tax perspective. And those decisions are going to start happening more and more.
Well, one of the things that I found in the questions is how competitive it is to attract new business to West Virginia. But Rebecca, you brought up also, and as you're pointing out, retaining the businesses. This week, the West Virginia Chamber of Commerce had a breakfast meeting, and Commerce Secretary Woody Thrasher said, I asked the question about how important this tax was to businesses looking at West Virginia, and in particular maybe along the natural gas development. And he said it was probably the #1 thing they looked at. It would be a huge decision on whether they choose West Virginia or Ohio or Pennsylvania or someplace else.
Great. And what makes it worse is we've had this for decades. You know, this is a problem that we've continually tried. I talked to a legislator recently who hasn't served in quite some time. He was trying to address this back when he was in the legislature. So this is something we have to fix, I think, not just for right now for the opportunities of natural gas, but for the future as well. That's what I think is so frustrating, is we've been trying to do this for a long time, which makes it even more imperative.
Yeah, Rebecca, you had brought it up that had been a priority for your organization for a decade or more than a decade.
2 decades. And certainly now we've seen some changes at the federal level from a tax perspective and reshoring, if you will, of manufacturing. You know, the challenge that we have in not acting on this particular amendment is that we watch all the states around us who are much more competitively placed and positioned for attracting that reshoring, take advantage of opportunities, and we miss out.
Well, I've heard that we are, right now the legislature is looking at how much money they can provide commerce to try and bring business in. They want site money, they want to do some things that would help. But if we're also facing this challenge, it's just that much harder to get somebody in.
And it requires money to make money. I mean, the other thing I think when you hear from Secretary Thrasher, who's very eloquent about this, we've got to fund the Department of Commerce where it can compete. I think not only with contiguous states, but across the country and across the world. It's hard, I know, in some cases when you face a small state, rural state like we are, but at the same time there's opportunities here, but we have to sell them. What I hear from economic developers all the time is West Virginia's a blank slate in many ways when it comes to economic development. We've got to tell our story, and only West Virginians can do that.
Right. Now, Rebecca, I want to ask you this in particular because I think one of the things that people don't realize, and I know I didn't realize, is this tax isn't a growing revenue stream for West Virginia. Whether it's forcing people out, whether the competition is attracting people to other states, but we're seeing less revenue from this tax every year. Can you address that a little bit?
Sure. You know, one of the primary concerns in the past when this policy has been addressed is the potential loss of revenues to county governments and schools who benefit from the inventory, machinery, and equipment tax. That's been addressed in this bill, and everyone took a hard look at those revenues, which have steadily declined to the tune of $40 million for the last 5 years. Now, what that means is that those counties, through HCR 106, can lock into current revenue levels and have some certainty where they haven't had it in the last several years.
Bill, how's the Huntington area? What's going on in that? That's a very competitive market. How are things over there in your market?
You know, it's interesting right now, Don, we are literally cutting a ribbon, it feels like, every 4 days. We're running out of ribbon. I mean, it's kind of a fun time to be there. You're seeing entrepreneurs, young people start businesses, and yeah, restaurant, service industry, but also people making things. And there's an optimism. We have trouble quantifying what it all means, but I think you're seeing, you know, whether it's connected to tax reform, whether it's just overall optimism, people want to do business in our area and live there. So there is good news, but we have to share that good news. So there is an optimism. I think the thing we need from the legislature is to propel that further. And we hope, especially with this, when we look at some of the taxes that don't make us competitive, we have to find ways, I think, to at least be on the same playing field as other states, if not do better.
Right. Rebecca, I want to come back to the point you made about the counties. This isn't a broad sweep that the legislature hasn't thought out. This is a pretty narrow niche they're looking at right now in terms of it'll cover about $140 million of the tax. It doesn't impact everybody. Why was that? What's the reasoning behind that, you think?
Well, certainly there's a realization that we've had some fiscal issues in the recent past in the state, and so the approach was surgical. So there was a careful analysis of what would generate the most return, the most immediate return from an economic perspective, and how this tax repeal would be carved out. So you look at industrial inventory, machinery, and equipment manufacturing.
Right.
And how that multiplies from an economic growth perspective. For every one manufacturing job, you can count on at least 3 indirect jobs supporting that industry. So if you're able to attract 100 manufacturing jobs, that means 400 in the aggregate, and that makes a difference. That makes a quicker impact. It gives the state the opportunity to be responsible in how they budget for those changes, and it allows them to make the counties and schools whole by using a figure that is something that's achievable.
Well, that's great. I know, meeting with the County Commissioners Association, some other groups, there is worry in the counties around the state about doing that. And I think one other thing that is not clear around the state, and I want to make sure that we touch on that as we close out. This is an uphill fight. This bill doesn't end this discussion. If these bills, or a variation of these bills, pass, that just allows the state and groups like yours to talk to the people of West Virginia. We can both talk a little bit about what the people can expect in terms of education about this and what will happen if this bill passes.
To your point, this is an amendment that would require a vote of the people of West Virginia to determine whether or not these taxes should be repealed, because it requires a constitutional amendment. So I think what we are trying to help people understand right now is that the legislature isn't voting to repeal the tax. They're voting to give West Virginians an opportunity to determine how we invest in our economic future. Beyond that, our job is to show and to demonstrate what that type of change could compel in terms of economic growth, and that stability is needed in those county and school revenues, and that it's a foundational issue for economic growth.
Okay. Bill, you're the chamber. You guys do a lot of educational programming, things to keep your members and the public informed. The public around West Virginia, if this bill for the amendment passes, can expect to see a lot more educational material out, a lot more programs from groups like yours?
I think it's always going to be, what does it mean to me? How's it going to affect my, my personal income, my budget, what I'm trying to deal with as a West Virginian, and that's what we have to reach. I think you saw that with the outreach with the road bond and what it can do for us economically. It's going to be very similar in this as we try to grow a private sector in the state. We still have a lot of counties that have a greater public employment than private employment, and that really worries me as a West Virginian. We've got to have that private sector grow to be able to support a lot of the services that we all expect, like good teachers.
Well, it sounds like there'll be a lot more discussion coming forth from the legislature on this, and then the question to the voters of West Virginia if it passes. I want to thank Bill and Rebecca for joining us and providing more information. Thank you for watching In Depth. Next on West Virginia Insight, Betsy DeBoer looks at tourism in the Northern Panhandle.
West Virginia is full of wonderful tourism attractions, and the Places to Go section of the Office of Tourism's website, go2wv.com, shows them in 9 travel regions. For the Northern Panhandle, you'll find the top 10 must-see stops. The list is impressive. From West Virginia's Independence Hall, to the Grave Creek Mound Center, to the Homer Laughlin China Company. Go2wv.com offers a 3-day itinerary for the Northern Panhandle. But with Wheeling Island and Mountaineer Casino in New Cumberland, 3 days may not be enough time. This year, head north for a great vacation.